Well, friends, welcome to Deacon 101, More Than a Social Visit. I am going to go ahead and I am going to share my screen. All right, can you see that now? Can you see the?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, I know this kind of throws some of you for a loop depending on which kind of device you are looking at. You might still see some people, you might only see the speaker, but we will do the best we can. If you are joining us by telephone, you are not going to be able to see my slides, but I will be speaking everything that's on them. So you won't, just won't be able to see the outline of what I'm sharing with the group, but you'll be able to hear everything. You just won't have the pretty graphics that go with it. So thank you everyone for being here. And to start with tonight, we are talking about how a deacon visit is more than just a social visit. It is inherently a social experience. It's a very important social and interactive experience. But when you enter into a conversation as a deacon, there is something profoundly and deeply and beautifully spiritual that can happen if you allow the space for that to happen. So just so you're aware, I can't see everybody on my screen. So if you have any questions, please make yourself heard. If you have any comments to share, likewise, I'm not going to see you raising your hands. But I do want to get to know just a little bit who is here with me tonight. So first of all, what churches are represented here tonight? So just kind of
First Presbyterian in Vegas.
You know, Osakis, wonderful.
Two of us.
All right.
Faith Presbyterian, Silver Lake.
Silver Lake
Westminster
does.
Withington.
Okay.
Wyndham.
First Presbyterian, Wilmer.
Litchfield.
Dawson.
I'm from Hope Church, Spicer.
Wonderful. See, we've got a good representation here. You're from lots of different places, and I suspect that all of you carry out the ministry of your deacons in slightly different ways. So tonight's training isn't going to be the nuts and bolts of how you do your work as a deacon on your respective deacon boards, but it's going to be more focused on basic principles that can apply to anyone. So I'm also interested to know tonight how long you have served as a deacon. So just kind of share your voice here. How many of you are brand new?
I'm brand new, but I'm on the presbytery board for the nurture.
Okay.
This is my second year. Does that make me brand new?
Well, it's close. It's close.
I'm going on my second year in Osakis also.
Okay.
I'm going on my second year.
I've been on and off several times.
Okay. So you kind of fit into that deacon for life category, right? You go, you serve for a while, you take a break, you come back. All right.
On my second
Any of
term,
you second term?
yeah, as well as Helen Jensen. She doesn't have a mic to speak.
Okay. Thank you for giving her a voice.
Anytime.
All right, so, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I've served almost 10 years, different times.
Okay,
I have
so
served
that counts
before
as a
too.
deacon for life too.
Yeah.
Good. Good, good. So lots of different variety of experience in this group. Right, so what I'd like you to do right now is imagine a giant pottery bowl sitting out in front of you. And this giant, imagine, if you will, that in this weird universe that we're occupying by Zoom, you and I are sitting across from each other. No matter how many other people are here, just for this moment, it's you and I directly across from each other, and the space between us is filled up with this giant pottery bowl. Tonight, we are going to be talking about holding sacred space. And the sacred space, we're going to imagine it filling this pottery bowl that is sitting on both of our knees between us. And we're going to talk for a minute about what goes into that sacred space in our time together tonight. One of the things that I want to put in this bowl is patience. I want to put patience in this bowl tonight because I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable doing this training. I've taught this training for, this is my 3rd year that I've taught deacons training for the presbytery. We kind of go back and forth and alternate between a really 101 level, less time, which is what tonight is, and something that's more advanced around a topic. Like last year, we brought in a speaker who spoke to us about how you minister with someone that has dementia. Okay, so, but this is an unfamiliar format for me. So I would like patience to go into this bowl between us tonight. Something else that I want to go in to this bowl between us tonight in this sacred space that we are creating is that I want to honor your time and your presence here. I want this to be valuable for you. And I want to respect that you are taking out a Thursday evening kind of right across the dinner time hour. And I'm going to do my best to keep us on task. So that's something that I'm contributing to this sacred space. Normally, in kind of a small group interaction like this, I might put confidentiality into this bowl. That is not going to happen tonight. So I can't put confidentiality into this bowl tonight because we are recording this for the presbytery, right? So, and I want you to be aware of that because you might choose not to share something that you would otherwise share because you know that is our reality. What other things would you like to put in this vessel tonight, into this time, into this space that we're occupying together?
Compassion.
Very good. Very, very good.
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
Love.
Love. I'm on board with all of those things. Keep them coming. Are there other things you want to add to this bowl and our time and space together? And it can be even technical. How many people here get really antsy sitting in front of Zoom? Anybody else get really antsy sitting in front of Zoom?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So I want to, if you need a break, you are an adult. It's okay to mute your microphone or shut or close your camera or not close your camera for a minute. That choice is up to you. And stand up and stretch. walk around the room for a little bit, go off and refill your coffee cup. I understand that those are the things that help make surviving Zoom tolerable. And I will give you a break in the middle of things. We're going to take a 5-minute stretch break, so you are not sitting here for 2 hours without a break.
Another thing for the bowl, empathy.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Maybe
Patient.
So empathy, patience,
Prayer.
prayer. Yes.
practicality.
Yeah, right? You need to learn something practical, walk away with something useful tonight, right?
Okay.
All right. So now we're going to set this bowl mentally, metaphorically set this bowl on the table beside you or on the floor beside you. And keep in mind that we've committed to these things in our time together tonight. And I'm going to start with the real black and white basics. What is a deacon? This comes straight from the Book of Order G202, 2.02. The ministry of deacon, as set forth in Scripture, is one of compassion, witness, and service, sharing in the redeeming love of Jesus Christ for the poor, the hungry, the sick, the lost, the friendless, the oppressed, those burdened by unjust policies or structures, or anyone in distress. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a minute. How does it feel to hear that list?
A little overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a little overwhelming. You aren't overwhelmed yet. You might be in just a moment, because we continue. Persons of spiritual character, honest repute, exemplary lives, brotherly love, sincere compassion, and sound judgment should be chosen for this ministry. Woo! How does that feel?
Kurt said that sounds like him.
So, you know, the Book of Order doesn't give you a whole lot of nuts and bolts about how to carry out the work of being a deacon, but it tells you the who, and the who is we're caring for anyone that needs care, and we're doing it as people of compassion and character. So it kind of feels like there's a lot of demand placed on you. And so when I talked about earlier, the reality that how this gets expressed in your unique context, from church to church, the work of a deacon can look very different. But the core truth is that you're doing this, you are caring, you are offering compassion, you are showing empathy, you are embodying kindness for someone who is in need. There are just lots of different ways to be in need. So what we're going to talk about tonight is the fundamentals of that interaction, whether it's the poor, the hungry, the sick, the lost, the friendless, the oppressed, those burdened, someone in distress. Regardless of who it is you are interacting with, there are some basic principles about how you do the work that you do, both with compassion, but also ethically. And so when we talk about doing a visit, doing a deacon's visit, I first want us to talk a little bit about what a visit is. So you are having a social visit. You are getting together with coffee, for coffee with a friend. What kind of things happen during that visit?
You talk about what they've been up to, what your
Mhm.
family's been up to, your
Mhm.
grandkids,
Yep.
all about you and them.
So there's mutual sharing. So mutual sharing, right?
Mm.
A little bit of laughter, maybe some hard honesty, about things you're struggling with. A little bit of the latest gossip.
No.
No, never. That never happens over coffee at the local watering hole, does it? Never. How often, when you join the morning coffee clash at the local cafe, do you talk about what God is doing in your life?
Seldom.
Seldom. Now, the reality is it might be there. That might be happening in your conversation, but you might not name it explicitly. But we want to kind of distinguish that there are some things that go in, right? Like we took the time to imagine this bowl and create our space together tonight. And when we're preparing to go out and do a deacon visit, although there's not whole lot of going out and doing that right now, it's mostly picking up the phone. We begin that visit before we get there. Before we pick up the phone, before we get in our car to drive across town, we are beginning that visit by making intentional choices in our own mind as deacons, as caregivers, about what is part of this visit and what isn't. And you named some of those things, right? Empathy, patience, kindness, compassion. All of those things are part of that visit. Explicitly, God is part of this visit. And so we're going to talk about we're going to go through the 6 things. There are 6 things that we do, choices that we make when we approach a deacon visit that help create sacred space for the person we are calling on. And the first one is that holding sacred space for another person means showing up and being fully present. Showing up and being fully present. So I had a professor that reminded our pastoral care class that pastoral care is 90% just showing up. And as deacons, you are part of the ministry of care of your congregation. You are an extension of the pastoral care that the pastor provides. You are in partnership with the pastor. So the same is true for you. 90% is just showing up. People need to know you care. Doesn't mean you come with all the answers. Doesn't mean that you know how to solve all the problems. It means that you cared enough to be present. So I'm going to ask kind of this really honest question. What keeps you from being fully present?
Things going on in our own lives.
Yeah. And when you say things, things is a big word. What kind of things going on in our own lives?
Oh, what I need to do today, what I need to accomplish today. Am I maybe at odds with a family member? Unsure of what
Yeah.
making sure that what I say is the right thing when I'm visiting.
Yeah. Those are big things.
Will my son get home from his trip? Will he drive safe?
Right? So we've got our own worries and cares going on behind the scene, don't we? We've got our own agenda for the day that requires our attention. What else keeps you from being fully present?
You're hungry?
Right? That's like really basic. You're hungry, you're thirsty, you need to go to the bathroom. This one for me, I struggle with this one. I don't like to be hot. I get really uncomfortable when I'm hot. Anyone know what temperature they keep the thermostat set at in nursing homes?
Oh,
Yeah, hot.
Hot, right? So sometimes there are environmental things that keep us from being fully present. What else keeps you from being fully present?
Being distracted.
Yeah, being distracted.
Sometimes
And-
you do not know that person as well either.
Yeah. And what does not knowing that person,
You don't know
what
their
does,
favorite things or things that they've done in the past or family. They maybe not be attending the church very much, so you really have not seen them as much.
yeah, you
And-
could be meeting a stranger.
Yes. And so you don't know exactly where your conversations is going to begin.
Right? Okay, so showing up and being fully present, first of all, begins with us. It begins with being able to name our own discomfort, our own biases, our own expectations, our own distractions, sometimes our own grief that we're struggling with, right? So deacons are human beings, and you might be still recovering from the grief of the loss of a parent, and you're called upon to go visit someone who's just been admitted to hospice in the nursing home, right? So you're bringing your own stuff along to the visit, and you can't not bring your own stuff along to the visit, but it's really critical that you be able to recognize and name your own stuff that you're bringing to the visit, because part of showing up and being fully present to another person is being able to check your own baggage outside the door long enough to give this person your full and undivided attention. And that's hard. I'm not going to say that that isn't hard, because it is, but it's a conscious choice that we make, and it gets easier with practice. And so the most important 5 minutes of your deacon visit might be the one where you sit down in your chair or in the seat of your car before you pick up the phone or before you walk into the building, and take some deep breaths and clear your mind and say your own prayer that God will help you be present in that, to show up for that other person.
Do these points also apply to
One of the things,
visits?
yeah, absolutely. And in fact, sometimes for me personally, I need to work harder at clearing the space for those telephone visits. When I'm going to a visit, you know, if I'm going across town to go see someone, I've had 5 minutes in the car. Before I pick up the telephone, there have been who knows what else going on. And so that applies absolutely to the telephone visit too. This is one that the second item on this list is, for me, critically important. And it took me years to figure out how important it was. And that is establishing clear expectations around your visit. some of my Wilmer deacons here, who've been on the board for a while or have served in the past, will remember that there was one of our dear sweet congregation members who the deacon would call up and schedule to go over for coffee and a visit, and they would show up at the door and she would be standing there with her purse saying, all right, I've got a list of 6 errands that need to be run, let's go. and suddenly what what was supposed to be stopping in for 30 minutes for a visit became an entire afternoon of running around town. And if you have the time to do that, that's wonderful. But sometimes in order to be fully present to another person, we need to have laid the groundwork for what exactly the expectations are. And we do that for the other person and we do that for ourselves. And so that's being really clear up front. And so, we've got a visit, calling up and saying, I want, this is Leanne, I'm a deacon, one of the deacons from the church, and I would love to come visit you. And then lay out what that means. Do you have an hour of time that would be good for a visit? Would you like to go somewhere for coffee? Can I bring treats when I come? We have some of our folks who would love it if you stopped and picked up a milkshake on the way. And you get to know that over time. But it really helps to establish clear boundaries around your visit and really showing respect and awareness. I realize you just got out of the hospital, and I'm sure you're tired and you need to focus on your recovery, but can I come for 15 minutes? Just really establishing right up front some parameters around your time together. Sometimes we've had people that were difficult to visit. If you've spent much time around folks who have had dementia, sometimes boundaries are questionable. And we had, one person that we had to tell our deacons, it's okay to establish, I'm going to come and visit, and let's go sit down in the common room while I'm there. So that expectation was clear before you got there. When I get there, let's take our coffee and go sit down in the common room. So this is, and you have to kind of know what that is for yourself. But it's a gift you can give to the other person to make it clear. So they're not wondering either. There's nothing worse than having someone come over to your home and you don't know how to get rid of them and if they're ever going to leave. Right? So, and then removing distractions. We will go into a hospital rooms and nursing home rooms. 9 times out of 10, you come in and the television is on. And the person just starts talking to you over the television. It's okay to stop and say, is it all right if I turn the volume down on the television while I'm here? And most of the time they're quick to say yes. It just, didn't happen automatically. Simple things like for me and my heat discomfort, I think about how I'm going to dress before I go. And I don't sit in my coat while I'm visiting, right? I take it off and I carry it in on my arm. Other distractions that we need to remove, silencing your cell phone for the duration of your visit so that you're not distracted and looking at it. Thinking about other distractions that are present in the room that you can have some control over. Blinds that are shining in somebody's eyes, whatever those might be. So showing up and being fully present. Holding sacred space for another person means inviting God into the experience. And this is probably the biggest difference between a typical social visit and a visit of caring and compassion from a deacon. And this begins, like I said, first of all, this begins with what happens in your own mind and attitude before you walk in the door. You need to remind yourself why you're there. But then also with the other person, being clear about who you are and why you are there. Introducing yourself clearly. Hi, I'm Leanne. I'm one of the deacons from the church, and I'm so happy to come and visit you today. And then maybe, and you know why you're there, you know what your purpose is, and maybe it's we just wanted to come see you since you've had following your surgery, and see if there are ways the church can offer you support and care. Just wanted to reconnect with you because I haven't seen you for a while, whatever your purpose is for the day. And then whatever else you do that day and whatever else you say, plan to pray. This is one of the key distinguishing features between a kind of a pastoral care or deacon care visit, is that prayer is part of this conversation. How many of you are comfortable praying?
I do it.
How many of, yeah?
I had an
Is that a really,
experience the other day when I called one of our oldest members in our church, and she asked if we could do a prayer. So before I got started, she started this really nice long prayer. So she's the one that had shared the prayer during that. So,
oh, that is wonderful.
yeah,
That is wonderful. And you are visiting some, you are potentially visiting some powerhouse people in faith. And it's absolutely appropriate to ask them if they would like to pray. They may offer to pray. They might offer to pray for you. And that's really great. But it's also okay to start where you are and learn as you go. If you have access to a book of common worship, if there's one in your church library or your pastor has one, I highly recommend going and getting that and copying out a few prayers. You will find in there really kind of short, easy to pray prayers for all kinds of circumstances. Prayers for the ill, prayers for individuals with dementia, prayers for people who are grieving, prayers for people who are facing surgery. And that's a good way to start if you aren't real comfortable with publicly praying with another person. The more you do it, the more comfortable it will become. So practice. And here's the other thing I will say about prayer. We're really used to, as Presbyterians, we close our meetings in prayer, right? Prayer marks the end of something. And early in my ministry, I would do a visit. I'd visit one of our saints in the nursing home. We'd have this wonderful visit. It's about time to wrap up. I'm watching the clock. It's time for me to go. I don't want to overstay my welcome. I can see she's getting tired. And I'm going to close us in prayer. And so I would close us in prayer. And then I'd sit back down because I would be there another 30 minutes. because prayer is often not the period at the end of the sentence. It is the pause that opens the door. And it is sometimes in that sacred activity of prayer that sort of opens, and you can almost feel it when it happens. You say this prayer and something changes in the nature of that conversation, and things get real and authentic in a way they weren't before you prayed. And so don't be surprised. Don't expect necessarily to pray and run out the door, because it might be that once you've prayed, that's finally where you get to the real issue of what's happening in someone's life. So inviting God into the experience. Holding sacred space for another person means focusing on one person at a time, and that person is not you. That's the first thing to know. You're focusing on one person at a time, and that person is not you. So I want to clarify by saying a lot of times our visits are one-on-one, but sometimes those visits, you go and visit someone in the hospital and a family member is present, or you go and visit them in the nursing home and a family member is present. And be very careful about who is dominating the conversation. Just because you might have to carefully redirect back to who the focus of the conversation is. Now, it might be the caregiver. If someone has just had surgery and they're lying in bed and they're a little groggy, and you've shown up just to drop off, our deacons do hospital visits. I don't know how many folks do hospital visits, but hospital visits, you don't overstay your welcome. You go in, you're there briefly, and you leave again, because people aren't in the hospital unless they really need to be there. But the person you might be caring for in that visit is that person's caregiver, their spouse, their son or daughter, their sibling. So just kind of paying attention. But if you go and visit a couple in their home, you're always paying attention to one person at a time, but you might need to be conscious of including, redirecting your focus so both people feel heard and listened to and included in the conversation. And part of what we do in order to accomplish that is what we really want is for people to know that they are being heard, that they are being appreciated, that you care enough about them to be there. And one of the ways that we use skills that help us do this is to practice active listening. You could very well have heard of active listening before, but the basics of active listening are you pay attention. This is harder over the phone because you can't make eye contact with someone, but it's also often are less other distractions. But you pay attention. You give that person your undivided attention. You show that you're listening through your body language, your gestures. You nod occasionally. You smile in response to what people are saying. You sit in a way that's open and inviting. If I were sitting like this, that's not open and inviting. And so we're aware of that. Now, over the phone, you still have to show that you're listening, but you're doing it with auditory cues, right? You're providing feedback that indicates that you're hearing what the other person is saying and that you're engaged in what they're saying. So it sounds like you're really struggling right now, or it sounds like you've been in a lot of pain, or it sounds like things are going pretty well, right? Using those kind of verbal, what I hear you saying is, and it sounds a little stiff when you say it exactly like that, but you use those phrases that indicate you're listening. And this is a note about being on the phone. When you're on the phone, we are providing feedback by how we are present on the phone in ways that we think people aren't always aware of, but they are. If you are typing on a keyboard while you're talking, people can tell. Right? Yeah. When you call someone up, you can tell when you call someone up and you're talking to them and they're multitasking in the background. You can tell how people are listening to you. So just be aware of that. And driving in the car is really hard. When you're talking in the car and you're driving, people can tell you're talking on your phone over Bluetooth in the car, and they can hear road noise, and it can get in the way of having a clear conversation. So just think about those kind of things. Those are ways that we show we're listening. Deferring judgment. This is one of the really important pieces of active listening. Allow the speaker to finish each point. Not talking over the top of them. So don't interrupt with counter arguments. My favorite, don't problem solve for them. Well, it sounds like what you need to do is, that is not the purpose of a caring and compassionate conversation. And then respond appropriately. Be candid, open, and honest in your response. Assert your opinions respectfully. Assert your opinions respectfully. Be candid and open and honest in your response. Treat other people the way you think they want to be treated. This one has been tested to the limits sometimes in our current political world. It is altogether possible that you are going to go visit someone who has vastly different political views than you do, who has been watching the all-day news station that is not your station of choice. And they are going to tell you all about their very strong opinions. How do you think you handle that in a visit of care and compassion?
That would be tough.
You could redirect the conversation.
Bingo. Redirect the conversation as quickly as possible. And I would say we're going back to that. We're inviting God into this space. And I'm going to help you with that in a minute. As we move forward, we're going to talk about how we redirect to other conversations. But just being aware that and catching yourself that this is not a deacon's visit, is not the time to have a political argument. It is also, that doesn't mean you have to validate the things that people are telling you that you don't agree with. But remembering the purpose of your visit there. Okay. So I'm going to ask us, just for the next few minutes, I'm going to break us. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, this will work. So I'm going to break you into groups of 2. If I can figure out how to do this. And when I break you up into groups of 2, I'm going to ask you to practice some active listening with each other. And some of you who are, and 2 or 3, groups of 2 or 3, I know that some of you are on together, and that's fine. So some of these will be groups of 2, some will be groups of 3. And I just want to take some time. Some of you who know me and are part of my groups have already done this with me. So you've already got practice. You should be ready tonight. We're going to practice active listening with each other by having a conversation called Rosebud and Thorn. So the rose represents something in your life that is healthy and flourishing, something that's in full bloom. The bud is something in your life that is just emerging or getting ready to bloom. And the thorn is something in your life that is challenging or prickly. And you don't have to talk about all 3. You don't have to share any more than you're comfortable sharing. So if you've got a real thing in your life that is a thorn and you're not sure you want to talk about that, you are not obligated to do so. You can pick some other thorn that's easier to talk about, or take kind of a lighthearted approach to this. And I don't want you to spend too much time talking about these things. But this is to give you a chance to practice sharing and listening, and just get to know each other a little bit better while you do it. And also to keep in mind that these are the kind of questions that you can bring up in a conversation. I wouldn't do it like this. I wouldn't go in and say, hey, we're going to play a game. But you could go in and say, what's something in your life that's really good right now? What is something in your life you're struggling with? Is there anything new and interesting happening in your life right now? Right? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, welcome back, everybody. Did you all get to practice being good listeners?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gave the other person time to speak. Didn't judge them for what they shared. Right? You talked about something just a little bit deeper than the weather and lived to tell about it.
Yeah. I would say so.
All right. All right. I'm glad to hear that. All right. So, oh gosh. I'm going to share my screen again. And it's time for intermission. So take 5 minutes for self-care. Get up and stretch, walk up and down the hallway, do whatever you need to do for about 5 minutes, and I'll see you when you come back. Okay, so I want to just check in. We're actually a little over halfway through, so we're going to finish early tonight, but I've been moving pretty quickly, and this has not been nearly as interactive as I like training to be. So I do want to stop and check in with everybody. How are you doing up to this point? Do you have some questions about what we've covered so far?
Doing fine.
All right. Then we're going to keep forging ahead. Holding sacred space for another person means crafting intentional spiritual conversation. You just had a little taste of that in your breakout rooms, crafting intentional spiritual conversation. But being part of crafting intentional spiritual conversation is that as much as possible, we're going to minimize small talk. There will always be some of that. It's a good way to warm up a conversation when you're just getting acquainted with someone, or you're entering into someone's space. Small talk is a safe way to start the conversation. Talk about the weather, talk about what's happening in the news. That's great, but that should not be the entire content of the conversation. The second important thing is be prepared to talk about the church. Now, there are some limits to this when we get to confidentiality, but be prepared to talk about the church. You are, in a very real sense, a person's connection to their church. You are embodying the church for them when you enter into that visit space. They're going to want to know what's going on. So be prepared to talk about what's been happening in the life of the church. Is there a mission project that you've been engaged in? Did you have someone do special music that was really beautiful and meaningful? What other things would you want to know about your church if you hadn't been there in a while?
How is so-and-so?
How is so-and-so? Exactly. This is the parentheses around limits. What can you tell them about so-and-so?
Oh,
You can tell them things that are public knowledge, right? So if the pastor announced it as part of the prayer list from the pulpit, you can do that. If it doesn't violate someone's confidentiality, you can do that. And we're going to talk about why this matters more when we get to confidentiality. But people want to know about each other, and that's fair. And it might be a conversation that says, you know, I saw in the newsletter that so-and-so was on the prayer list. What's going on? Right? Well, if it's common knowledge and it's been shared, that so-and-so has been diagnosed with cancer and is undergoing treatment and is doing pretty well, but that's probably enough. So be prepared to talk about things, but also don't overshare as much as you can help it. And also then, what else? What else might people want to know about the church?
Things that are happening.
Things that are happening. Yep. Sometimes you might be the one who brings the church bulletin or the newsletter or a copy of the sermon manuscript.
I think lots of times people may want to talk about the financial condition. I don't know if that would be
Yeah.
very appropriate.
Well, it's certainly a real concern for people. It's kind of a generational thing too, but there again, you can share what you know. But the other thing I always try to is err on the side of being positive, right? Don't be falsely positive. But this is not the time to go in and be like, oh, woe is me. I can't believe what's happening in the church. There's just so much conflict and so just won't shut up at meetings, right? That's not an uplifting and encouraging conversation. But you know, think about what you know about the people. did they serve on session? Were they chair of the budget committee for 15 years? Were they a deacon themselves? Those are all part of their story. And those are things you can talk about. Maybe you can't share a whole lot about the specific things that are happening with people. Whoops. You know, it's okay to say, oh, and I'm going the wrong direction. It's okay to say, we've been praying for this person. It's okay to say, you know, we're thinking about this new thing. But then it's also okay to turn that around and ask questions. You know, if somebody's asking you about the budget, like, I can tell this is really important to you. Were you part of the budget committee, or did you ever serve on the budget committee, or what about this is interesting to you?
It would be easy to be negative about that too.
Yeah, it really would. But what we bring into that space, and this isn't necessarily talking about the church, but being really conscious of what I didn't talk about this earlier, so I'll talk about it now. Thinking about the energy you bring into the space. I went to visit one of the saints in our congregation one day who was nearing the end of her life, and she had been battling cancer. And I went to visit her, and I walked in the door, and before I even got hello out, she said, "Pastor, I told a lie, and I need to beg for forgiveness. And the lie was about you." Like, all right. So I, just kind of joked around with her. All right, time for confession. What do I need to absolve you of? And she shared, she said, "I had a visitor earlier. And I know that she came to cheer me up, but she spent the entire visit talking about the 3 other people that she knew that had died from the kind of cancer I had. And I just couldn't take it anymore. She was bringing me down. So I lied and told her we had to wrap up our visit because my pastor was going to be here any minute. So I told her she could lie. She could tell that lie anytime she needed to. But we really do have to be careful about the kind of energy that we bring into the space. And that's, in her case, that was negativity about her illness and the struggle with cancer. But that could be negativity about the budget or the state of things at the church. And so what we really want to reinforce is the power of encouragement in people's lives. How can my presence in this visit here be an encouragement to them? So one of the ways that we do that is by asking the right questions. And the right question is any question really that opens up meaningful conversation. And in the art of spiritual conversation, here are some examples of kind of questions that we can ask. And it goes without saying that we're going to ask open-ended questions. In other words, if the answer to the question could be yes or no, it's not an open-ended question, and it isn't a question that furthers conversation. So we're going to ask open-ended conversation, open-ended questions. But some of the kind of questions that you could be prepared to ask people are, do you give much thought to God and spiritual things? What has God been doing in your life lately? Tell me about one of your favorite experiences with the church. And this is great if you're visiting someone who's homebound or in a care center who has a long history with the church. They could talk for hours about experiences they had with the church. Tell me more about your church background. What role did church play in your childhood? How do you feel about your spiritual upbringing? How has your relationship with God changed over the years? When do you feel closest to God? Or what helps you feel closer to God? What helps you feel connected to your church? And when you ask that question, you might hear all the ways they're not feeling connected to their church. But that's a really important conversation to have, because you might discover that something comes out in that conversation that gives you a clue to how you can better care for them. I get this sermon manuscript mailed to me every week. But I can't read anymore. I can't see. I've lost my vision. So, is there a way they could hear a recording? Could someone come and sit and read it to them? So watch for those openings. And how can I encourage you or pray for you today? Is there something you'd like me to pray for with you while I'm here today? And then you might hear about, when I talked about this opening up conversation, you might hear about the nephew who just started inpatient alcohol addiction treatment. You might hear about the daughter that just lost her job. You might, right? Like the possibilities are endless. But when you ask, how can I pray for you today? You might also hear, I'd rather pray for you. And that's good too. So starting spiritual conversations is kind of having sort of in this mind, this handful of questions that you can go to if there's a lull in conversation, or even if you need to redirect. We talked about that earlier, needing to redirect the conversation. So
Can I pick and choose
Kind of
from this list?
open-ended questions would you ask not related to the church?
what kind of questions would you ask not related to the church? Oh, look for hints in the environment. So you're going to visit a widower, and you see sitting on his side table prominently displayed a picture of he and his wife on their wedding. That is a really beautiful picture of you and your wife. I never got to know her. Tell me about her. Or you see something, and I say look for clues in the environment, because if it's in the environment, it's something important to them. And also it helps if you don't really know that person's history and story. Do you see evidence of being a veteran somewhere in that space? Do you see a folded flag displayed? Do you look for so clues like that, but also things people love to talk about, especially if you're visiting people who might be inching towards some early stages of dementia. It is easier to talk about history, their personal history, than to talk about current events. So did you grow up with brothers and sisters? That's a yes or no question, but then the follow-up is, tell me about your brother. Was he older than you, younger than you? What kind of relationship did you have with him? What kind of trouble did you get in together when you were kids?
Grandchildren.
So grandchildren, yes. If they're usually hanging on the refrigerator or in a composite frame on the wall, right? Ask about grandchildren. Children, ask about children. So, and even just kind of, if they have even really simple things, is there a bird feeder outside the window? Do you see a lot of birds out at your feeder? What kind of birds come to your bird feeder? So pick up cues in the environment, or what you know about them, the knowledge of them that you bring with you when you come to see them. this might be someone you know really well, and it's really easy to pick up on those conversations. Or it might not, and you struggle a little bit more. Hobbies.
Hobbies, yeah.
How do you pass the time? What kind of things do you like to do? You might learn that you should never show up during bingo, right? Do not ever visit during bingo, because that's my jam.
I've been a hospice person, and so you meet people you never have met before. And I always found that it was best to talk about childhood and about their school that they did, and the kind of work maybe they had done. You just go in the past, and because they maybe have some dementia, but they still have a recall of it. And one time, it was during the Christmas time, and I had brought my hymnal along, and I started singing Christmas carols, and this woman never spoke to me before, but she began singing with me the hymns that I was singing.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes. And
Oh,
so
that's
it
beautiful.
was a joy that day.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a good lead into our next one, which is holding sacred space for another person means learning to be comfortable with silence. And I don't necessarily mean silence in we're going to sit here and not fill the space at all, but being comfortable with the inability to verbally communicate sometimes too. We human beings are not comfortable with silence, and we will talk just for the sake of talking sometimes rather than to deal with silence. And being comfortable with silence means leaving space for the other person to take the lead. And it might take them a while. They might have trouble forming their thoughts or articulating for medical or emotional reasons. They might struggle with word recall. They might struggle with verbal communication in some way. And so our own comfort with silence gives them space to form what they need to form. It also, as you shared, sometimes it's enough to show up. You might be visiting a person who is nonverbal, and you're like, okay, what do I do here? If we can't have a conversation, is it even worth going? I've had people ask me that, and the answer is yes, because sometimes it's enough to show up. And maybe what you do is you pull out the hymn book, and you sing some hymns. If you're not a singer, read some scripture. If you look around the room, there might be a Bible there, or I carry my several versions of the Bible around on my phone as an app. And so you can read scripture, you can sing hymns. Even if all you do is come and sit next to someone, they might know you're there, and that might be enough. And their loved ones will know you showed up and were present. So we offer what comfort we can. We offer comfort when we can offer comfort, whether that comes through conversation or by presence.
Leanne,
Yes.
talk about touch.
Touch. Touch is
Tricky.
touch is tricky. sometimes people really need touch, but I always ask permission first. And is it okay if I hold your hand while we pray? And even sometimes, like, you see someone becoming really emotional, and it's that instinct to reach out and grab their hands. Say it before you do it. I recognize that this is really emotional for you. Would it be comforting for you if I held your hand while we talk about this? And I know that feels a little weird and it feels a little awkward, but we live in the age of consent. And even I went to visit someone one time, and her daughter was there with her, and she was not coherent. And her daughter reached out and touched her head to smooth the hair back, and her mother like swatted at her. And she started laughing. She said, "My mom cannot stand being touched. She's never liked it." And so those things are still, now sometimes touch is the only way we have of communicating with each other. And it's the only way that we have to offer comfort. Ask permission. If that's not possible, be very, very cautious about how you touch and where you touch. Reach out and pat a hand. Don't reach out and pat a shoulder, for instance.
Hugging?
No.
With permission. And there I would say with permission. And stick to those kind of nice side hugs, right? Some people just really want to hug, and you can tell they want to hug. And that's based on your own comfort level first. If you are not comfortable giving someone a hug, don't offer a hug. If you are comfortable with it, you can say, "Would you like a hug? Would that help right now?" But always ask permission. It's just, it's the respectful thing to do. And there are other personal boundaries. You might walk into someone's nursing home room and find them exposed in ways you are not comfortable with, and they would not be comfortable with if they were aware enough to be uncomfortable with it. And at that point, I've walked in and said, "I'm just going to pull your sheet up, okay?" I've also gone back out of the room and asked a nurse or a nurse's aide to come in and do something to protect someone's modesty before I entered the room for a visit. And that's a basic respect thing. That's protecting and caring for our loved ones. Other thoughts on touch? Okay. Holding sacred space for another person means, now this is number 6 on our list. It is not, and it's the last one. It's not the last one because it's the least important. It is probably the most important, and I want to end with it so that you don't forget it. Holding sacred space for another person means holding the person's sacred story in confidence. Confidentiality is non-negotiable. It is absolutely non-negotiable. You are being invited in by nature of your office as deacons into some very vulnerable places in people's lives. Confidentiality is non-negotiable. Now that's really hard because you might have a really great experience or funny experience with someone, and you want to go back to your next deacons meeting and you want to tell them all about this this experience you had. Think before you do that. I had, at one point in my ministry, I had a member of the congregation who was a deacon's board lifer, right? They took the year off when they had to and then came right back on the deacon's board. They were the quintessential deacon. And when that person reached a stage in their life where she was homebound, and as a pastor, I went out to try and offer, she had been refusing deacon visits, flat out refusing to have deacon's visits. And I went to visit with her and I said, you know, you were a deacon for a really long time. You know how important and meaningful this can be. What's keeping you from accepting deacon's visit? And she said, they're going to talk about me at the meetings because we always did. Right. That's not okay. Part of creating sacred space for people is giving them a safe place to share and to be heard and be cared for. And when we violate confidentiality, we undermine the trust that's necessary for that. And this is now, we're going to go back to people want to hear about what's happening at the church and what's going on in the lives of people at the church. We are modeling confidentiality for the person we are visiting by how we talk about others. So if you schedule an afternoon of deacons visits, and first you go see Mary, and then you go see James, and then you go see Martha, and Martha says, you know, I haven't, I really miss Mary. You know, Mary and I served on the funeral committee together. We spent so much time together, and now we just don't talk anymore. Do you know how Mary's doing? If you begin the conversation, well, as a matter of fact, I just came from visiting Mary. And did you know that Mary has 3 new grandbabies, and right? And you share everything that you just learned about Mary in Mary's deacon visit. You have just undermined the safety of the sacred space you're trying to create with Martha. Now, Martha might really want to go know about Mary, but Mary, maybe the appropriate response is, what's keeping you from picking up the phone and calling Mary? Do you want me to help you right now? I could help you dial the phone. I've got a directory here in my bag with her number. But so being really careful about how and that's why really being clear about what you say. Well, I can tell you, you asked about John Smith. I can tell you what the pastor told us from the pulpit on Sunday when he asked for prayer requests, and what he said was, right? So that's a really tricky one, but it's about making people feel safe and comfortable, knowing that you are trustworthy.
How about if you get cards? Can you read those if they're personal?
Yes.
Like to the deacons and that, okay.
Yes. Yep. If you get cards that have been sent to the deacons and people are sharing, they've put that out there. And with some, the way I kind of like to phrase it is, what do the other deacons need to know about your most recent deacon visit that contributes to the safety and the welfare of the deacons and the person you're visiting? So it's okay to say, when I visited Susan this last week, she was really down. She could use a little extra encouragement. You don't have to share what she was down about. But to that end, I always ask permission to share. And I would ask that you always ask permission to share. And you can do that by saying, you know, this is a really important thing, I can tell this is really a heavy burden that you're carrying. Are you comfortable with me sharing this with the deacons for us to pray about at our next meeting? And my all-time favorite, this sounds like something the pastor should know. Are you comfortable with me sharing this with the pastor?
That was my next question.
So it goes back to that, you know, the whole thing with touch. It's permission. It's asking permission, and just being very, very frank about the permission you're asking, and specifically what you're going to share. I'm not going to share our whole conversation with Pastor Leanne, but I think it's important for her to know this. Is it okay if I share that? And prayer list things, especially, you call up someone for a deacon's call and you learned that that person's brother passed away. Do I have your permission to add this to our prayer list at the church? Don't make an assumption about that. Always ask permission. And in fact, as the pastor, if you come to me and say, we need to add Robert's name to the prayer list, because I learned from Helen that he was in the hospital and he was sick. My first question is going to be, did she give permission to be added to the prayer list? So,
Is there any information that you think the pastor should know that you haven't asked permission? For
yes.
example, I saw a member of our church out at Walmart, and we were talking, and she told me, I didn't ask her about this. She told me that she was having impending heart surgery. And that kind of ended the conversation. But then I called the pastor and told him.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Now I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself, that wasn't the right thing to do.
Well, you know, and that person shared it in the parking lot of Walmart. So right. And I would err on the side of trusting your pastor to handle that appropriately. But specifically when you're in the role of deacon and the visit is in the context of deacon, there is an extra expectation for confidentiality. But I will tell you, there are a lot of times pastors don't hear those things like what you just shared, and we need to. Because sometimes people drop those hints like that just so you'll share the pastor, just so the pastor will find out, right? And then 3 weeks later, the pastor doesn't know that they've had surgery and they're mad because the pastor never came to visit. So it's a tricky balance. But here are the exceptions. Most of the time we talk about being mandated reporters in the context of working with children. But being a mandated reporter applies to vulnerable adults as well. And many of the folks, older members of our congregation and in care facilities, qualify as vulnerable adults. And there are always exceptions. And the 3 exceptions is if someone shares that they are planning to harm themselves, they are planning to harm another, or someone is harming them. In those circumstances, you do not have to ask permission to share that information. You can ask permission. You can say, I'm really concerned about you. Can I share this with the pastor? But you can also just pick up the phone after that visit and call the pastor and say, you need to know this. Can you help me get this information to someone who can help? Planning to harm themselves, planning to harm another, or being harmed by another. And that's tricky stuff. In my lifetime, and in my career in ministry, I've encountered, going to visit a couple and recognizing that the wife had bruises all over her arms. And just, came out, she ultimately shared that her husband, who had dementia, was essentially physically assaulting her. And that's a really awful thing. And that's a really scary thing. And it's a really sad thing. And we have a responsibility to intervene and get that information to people who can help when someone's safety is at stake. Or you're concerned, maybe you're visiting someone who lives in the nursing home whose children live out of state. My mom is in South Dakota. I'm the closest one here in Minnesota. My brother is in Atlanta, and my sister is in Houston. I depend on those people who visit my mother regularly to keep me in the loop about how she's doing. And so, if you have concerns, it's okay to voice them, but I just wouldn't voice them with everybody. You pick and choose who you share them with. Usually your first stop would be to go to your pastor and help them figure out with you how to handle the information. Questions about confidentiality? Questions about anything else that we've covered tonight? So
Can I share an anecdote?
Yes.
As a deacon, I called on John Kaufman one time. And as I left, I realized he found out a lot more about me than I found out about him.
Yes.
Retired pastor. Very skillful.
Some of them can be pretty good at drawing you out, can't they? But that's a really good litmus test. What did you learn about this person? What can you say that you've learned about this person when you left, right? So what else in relation to be a deacon would you like to talk about before we end our time together tonight?
Okay, Pastor Leanne, you talked about the Book of Common Worship and some verse. Is there any way you can print some out or email us some, or you have the book?
Yes, there are. So I have a couple things that if we were meeting in person, I would hand out to you. What I will do is I will send them as attachments. If you're a deacon from Wilmer, I will send them to you directly. And included in that is a little folded sheet of paper that I've kind of taken an excerpt of some of the most practical, usable prayers, basic prayers.
Okay.
But I've also got other information about spiritual conversations and active listening. And I will, if you're, like I said, if you're a deacon from Wilmer, I'll send them to you directly. If you are a deacon from another church in our presbytery, I will send them to Karen so that she can distribute them to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question.
Right now, it's very difficult to make communications with our people that we have on our deacons list. And so we've been calling them and talking to them. And I think that's a good way of finding out what's all happening with them and how they are doing. Now, in the nursing home, it's a different story. We can probably, but these are people who are like in, we call it the Meadows, assisted living. It's easier making contact with them.
Yeah.
And some of them are in homes too.
This pandemic has been really, really hard. You know, a lot of people that we could go and show up and have a visit with really can't talk on the phone for various reasons. And so it really feels isolating. The other thing that's hard about this is, you know, we talked about touch, and we have to be so careful with touch, but there's something about being present in front of another person that is incarnational, even without touch, right? Being present face to face with someone that we are just missing, and people are missing. And it's a test of our patience and our creativity.
Mhm.
One of the things that cards are wonderful. One of our members who died recently, he was not able to talk on the phone, you know, so essentially we've not been able to visit or provide pastoral care to him, but his daughter she talked about him having a binder that someone in the nursing home had put together, a binder with all of the cards that the deacons had sent to him. And other cards that people had said to him, but the deacons had been regularly, faithfully sending cards, and he could pull out that binder and flip through and look at the cards in there. And so that was the incarnational presence that was available. And so never underestimate how important that is.
This has been an excellent workshop, Leanne.
Yes. Very much.
Thank you.
Is there a possibility of it being on a DVD that other deacons in our church could listen or watch?
So I have recorded this. I have recorded our time together, and I am not savvy enough with Zoom to know how that works, but Karen is, and this is recorded on the Presbytery Zoom account. So I would suspect that she's going to make that available, that the Presbytery will make that available or post it somewhere so that others can watch it.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good. You're welcome. All right, so I would like to close us tonight with a poem. And so this poem will essentially be our prayer for closing tonight. And I hope that you hear in this poem a reflection of some of the things that we've talked about tonight. It's titled Holding Space for You by Sherry Lee. There lies a sacred place where I hold space for you. Though I could never demand it, I wish you noticed. Walking alongside your journey, I am not judging, nor am I trying to fix you or impact the outcome. Your choices are yours alone to own. I simply observe and sense your deep-rooted insecurities. With unconditional love, my open heart is yours for the taking. For to be vulnerable is not a weakness or reason for fear. To seek someone near can create a safe space where you can fall apart and still stay intact. I will never react with malicious intent. To the desires of your heart in earnest yearning, let me be your strength and courage. Please dare not break my spirit in haste's mistakes. A support system takes its place by God's grace. Let go of control that burdens the soul and see what's beautifully true. I am holding space for you. So my deacon friends, blessings on your ministry. We have only scratched the surface tonight, but you are going to learn by the doing. And my prayer and my benediction and my blessing to you is that God will bless you and feed you as much as you feed others.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Leanne.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Leanne.
everyone.
Thank you.